that they're making that connects in some ways to some of the themes of our class. Anybody pick that up? Like, what's the relationship between Jews and the wider world? Like, what is the division between those two guys? The one who's eating the Greek food and the one who's like, why are you eating Greek food? Yeah, Shira, what's the point?
I think they're trying to talking about how they're no longer just traditionally Jewish, and you're talking about like the destruction of the first temple, and like how dare we just like move past that and like eat Greek food, and like they're talking about that, like how like that line is not even there anymore, like how Jewish culture is just like blending into popular culture, and popular culture is like blending into Jewish culture, and just everything is just kind of like the same now, but there's still this like weird distinction and weird obligation to be Jewish.
Yes, they definitely have a divide between them over like whether or not it's okay to embrace the broader culture. Like, should we still hold it against the Greeks that they tried to destroy the temple? That's what the whole holiday of Hanukkah is about. Or should we like take the good things that the Greeks gave us, like democracy and comedy and tragedy and theater and astronomy and philosophy, etc.? Like, are we going to hold that against them, right? Isaac.
Yeah, I was also just going to say that, like, a lot of the like modern Jewish culture itself is an amalgamation of other cultures. Like they were saying, like, oh, like latkes or like bagels and all these kind of, sorry, not latkes, whatever they said, bagels, and a lot of the food specifically, they're like Jewish food, and then they're like, oh, this is actually from a different culture, so it's from mixing food.
Right. So there's a big point there. Like, all the things that you identify as quote unquote Jewish, you know, one friend says the other, actually have been borrowed from other cultures. So what is it that is authentically, like, sort of organically Jewish? It's like, you know, it's like the bagel. It's like, give me a break. A bagel is a round circular Polish bread that, you know, Jews picked up when they were in Poland, right? Or babka. It's like, give me a break. That's a Russian pastry that they picked up when they were in Eastern Europe, right? So, you know, it's like what, and represents a dilemma, which I wanted to connect to some of our discussion of these adherents of the Enlightenment, who, on the one hand, like the friend, are like, yeah, let's go out and embrace the wider world that we live in and take advantage of all the different things. And the other hand, the friend is like, but if we do all of that, what keeps us like connected to our Jewishness, to our Jewish identity, right? Like, and so this is a debate that we see happening in the 1860s, right? Like when we're looking at the Judah Leib Gordon poems of, you know, awake my people and become Russian and speak Russian and learn Russian and be a man abroad and a Jew in your tent. And it's still happening in the 2010s and 2020s, right? Like, how do you do both of those things and not forget who you are, right? So anyway, and they're very funny, and their material is funny, and I promise you, when they perform on campus, they're going to do it in English, but they will sprinkle in some of that Yiddish, and they will teach you a little bit of Yiddish also. But it should be a lot of fun. They're very clever. So what I want to do before we get into discussing like the key terms on the for the midterm is to just circle back and review these poems by Judah Leib Gordon before we move on. So on at the end of class on Wednesday, I said, you know, have a look again at the poem by Judah Leib Gordon, the Awake My People poem, and then read his next poem in the document book, which comes right after Awake My People, right? And Awake My People, the theme is like, we live in this period of enlightenment. Russia's getting much better. They've freed the serfs. There's this great new Tsar, Alexander II. It's a new era of progress. Like, let's take advantage of this era and let's become Russian and speak Russian and learn Russian and open our hands to our brothers and blah, blah, blah. Okay? And, you know, be a man abroad and a Jew in your tent. And then I said, look at the next poem that's in the document book, which comes out 5 years later. For whom do I toil? And so I asked you to look at these two poems and reflect on what changes for Judah Leib Gordon, or his acronym, what he's known by as YALAG, because it's Yud Lamed Gordon, Yud Lamed Gimel, it's also referred to as YALAG, Judah Leib Gordon, Judah Leib Gordon. So what happens in between these two poems? And the poem's short, so we can read the poem together, but let's try to figure out like what changes for him between the two poems. Can somebody, Danielle, you want to read it?
Okay, do you want me to read just the second one?
Sure, just start with the part that we see on the screen here, my enlightened brothers.
Okay. My enlightened brothers have acquired worldly wisdom and are but loosely bound to the language of their people. They scorn the aged mother holding her spindle, abandon that language whose hour has passed. Abandon its literature, so tasteless, so bland. Leave it and let each one use the language of the land. And our sons, the generation to follow us, from their youth on, they will be strangers to us. My heart bleeds for them. They make progress year by year, they forge ahead. Who knows where they will reach?
I'm going to stop you there for a second and just look at the part that we see here on the screen. What is, and this doesn't have to be for Danielle, for anyone, or Danielle, you can answer, what's his critique of what is happening to the people who are adherents of the Haskalah Maskilim? What's he saying could happen as a result of this? Yeah, Hudson.
He's saying that like they're moving out. They're definitely acculturating and assimilating. They're learning the language. He says like in there, like right there in the first line, that his enlightened brothers have acquired worldly wisdom.
Yeah, they're now. This is kind of ironic for him to say this, right? Because he's like, they've acquired worldly wisdom. They're learning the language, and he's the one who was like, learn Russian, speak Russian. And I was like, whoa, wait a second, there's an issue here. Yeah, Deja Lee.
Yeah, like he's just so it's ironic because before he was obviously like pushing for people to become like Russian citizens into like a culture, but then now he realizes that like through that they're losing their connection, or like how strong of like a connection they had to Judaism. Like they've conformed so much that their children are like feeling less connected to it, and that could lead to the death of the religion eventually.
Yeah, so it sounds like he's having what would we call that, buyer's remorse, right? Like he's like, yeah, let's go all in on learning Russian, speaking Russian, let's do this. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh, wait a second, not so fast. Deanna, did you want to add something?
Yeah, essentially everything that's already been said, I also kind of talked about, but also now that they are all speaking Russian and have less of an understanding of Hebrew, it also creates a sort of divide between the religious texts that they were foundationed on, and now it's like that gap exists when it says, and our sons, the generation to follow us from their youth on, they will be strangers to us. So it creates that sort of like rift.
Yeah, so I want to focus on that sort of fear for the future, as he suggests, right? The generation to follow us and what he's worried about. Danielle, did you want to add something, or you want to keep reading the next part?
I can keep reading. I don't remember where I left off. Oh, it was the next page.
Yeah, you were at, they make progress year by year, they forge ahead, and here's the next part.
Who knows where they will reach, how far they will go, perhaps to that place when they shall never return. Still the muse visits by night, still the heart listens, the hand writes, fashioning songs and a tongue forsaken. What will I hope, to what end travail? For whom do I toil, to what avail? The good years wasted. Oh, who can foresee the future? Who can foretell? Perhaps I am the last of Zion's poets, and you the last readers.
Okay, right? For whom do I toil? To what avail? The good years wasted. Oh, who can foresee the future? Who can foretell? Perhaps I'm the last of Zion's poets, and you the last readers. So we've talked about like his worry that people are going to learn Russian. What does he mean here when he says, perhaps I'm the last of Zion's poets? What's he worried about? Yeah, Isaac.
Yeah, like by saying like the last of Zion's poets and you guys the last readers, like the last people, I guess, who speak the language or like are connected to like Jewish, I guess. In general.
Yeah, and what language is he writing this poem in?
It's in Hebrew, right? Not Yiddish or something.
That's right. Okay, so yeah, you see it here. It says source Judah Leib Gordon. You would have to know Hebrew to understand that this is saying Lemi ani amel. Lemi, for whom, ani, I. Do I work? Do I toil? So for whom do I toil? That's in Hebrew. So again, like we talked about in the last class, the irony of writing a poem in Hebrew saying like, wake up, learn Russian, speak Russian, become part of this great cultural awakening and this moment of progress. But the fact that he's writing it in Hebrew, and now he's having this regret, this remorse, like, okay, I'm writing this poetry in Hebrew, but what happens if, I am the last of Zion's poets. This project is so successful that there will not be any future Hebrew poets in the future, because everybody's going to forget, because they're going to become Russian. Danielle.
I was gonna say the same thing. Like in the second poem, he's almost apologetic because, like, in the first poem, he was like in a position where he could influence the people, and then he kind of like realizes his mistake. So he just keeps going, and that's why, like, in the end, he was like, perhaps it's just like a kind of like remorseful, sad tone to the whole thing, which is why it's ironic.
Yeah. So it is remorseful. It is sad. It is all of a sudden like, what if we're too successful? Why do y'all think he has this sudden shift between 1866 and 1871? What's going on? Yeah, Jenelise.
Didn't he go to prison in between that time? If I'm remembering correctly.
Oh, sorry. Well, I just have a clue here, but I don't think he ends up in prison. But let's say he did. Yeah, but not as far as I know. Jacob.
Didn't the SAR change?
So not yet, but I think you're onto something with that, like that suggestion. So between 1855 and 1881, it's still Alexander II, the son of Nicholas, who's the more progressive one. So it's still the same czar, but he's not as enthusiastic about the progress. He's not as enthusiastic about how things might change. Why else do you think he's not as enthusiastic about the possibilities of Russifying? And I gave a little, so we're going to get to this next week after the midterm, but this might give us a little clue, which is the pogroms, which are the outbreaks of violence against the Jewish population. So he doesn't know that this was going to happen in 1871, but he has seen that despite the sort of optimism of the Tsar and the idea of progress, people still treat the Jews very harshly in the Pale of Settlement. And there is still a lot of anti-Jewish hatred that persists. And there are still outbreaks of violence against the Jewish population. So suddenly, he's like, wait, what happens if we try to convince all the Jews to become Russian, learn Russian, speak Russian, and change isn't going to happen, and people are going to keep hating the Jews, and they're not going to be able to become part of this Mother Russia and serve in the army and do whatever and become sort of free livers in the cities of Moscow and see, like, they're not going to make those changes. So what happens if you convince everybody to learn Russian, speak Russian, and then they aren't able to take advantage of those opportunities, right? What are you left with? He's like, they'll just forget about being Jewish. They'll just forget about their people, their religion. They'll be stuck. So what's interesting, and we're going to follow up on this next week or in the next 2 weeks, is what this foreshadows is the development of a new movement after, especially after the outbreaks, huge outbreaks of violence in Eastern Europe with the pogroms that began in 1881. And that new movement is going to be sort of a movement of Jewish nationalism. And what you end up having in Eastern Europe is not like religious reform like you do in Central and Western Europe and in America, where people are like, okay, if we change our religiosity and we sort of conform to the popular culture, maybe we can become part of the society, because that's a real option. But in Eastern Europe and Russia, what you end up seeing is people saying there's no future for us here. Maybe we have to embrace the idea of Jewish nationalism. Maybe we have to embrace the idea of like Jews being a separate nation. Maybe we need our own homeland. Maybe we should advocate a return to the land of Israel. And we're going to see that developing as a movement out of this like Eastern European Jewish Enlightenment, right? Because they're not religious, they're not changing religiously, but they are changing the way they think of themselves nationally. So we'll get into that, and we'll see how that develops after that. All right, I'm going to stop myself here so we have a little bit of time to talk about what is going to be on the midterm. So you will see on Husky CT. Let me just go to Husky CT. Sorry. Sorry. There it is. Okay. So on, are you guys seeing our class site? Okay. So on Husky CT, you will see that I have added, here it is, key terms for the midterm. Okay. Have people accessed this resource yet? Key terms for the midterm? No? Maybe some of you have. So if you go into this doc, which I will open here, so you will see that I have pulled out from my notes like some of the main topics and concepts that we have reviewed in the different weeks and sections of the class, right? So I think this will be a really helpful study guide, right? Like if you think back to where we started with the Inquisition, or the people who were suspected of the conversos, the people who were suspected of converting but still practicing Judaism in secret. We talked about the difference between Sepharad and Ashkenaz, if you remember, or Sephardic and Ashkenazi. By the way, this is also between the key terms and the PowerPoint, most of the concepts you're going to see in those two places, right? Like anything that I'm going to ask you about on the test. Then we talked about migration of the Jewish population to Poland, and sort of what distinguished that population, but also why the Polish nobles would be interested in recruiting the Jewish population to move there. Talked about some of the distinctive aspects. This one, I don't think I spent much time on this. So I'm not going to ask you things that I did not ever talk about in class, right? So about like, I mentioned like what the Kehila was, which was the Jewish community structure, and we talked about some of that, but I'm not going to ask you like what's a base midrash, for example, right? Like I'm not going to ask you an obscure term, or shtadlanut, which I did not go over. Don't worry, it's in Gartner, but I didn't go over it in class, so I'm not going to ask you things that I didn't spend time on in class. Melnitsky, Shabtai Tzvi, false messiah. We talked about Hasidism, development of Hasidism, the spread of Hasidism, the Misnagdim, the opponents of Hasidism. Then we got into looking at Spinoza in Amsterdam, Manasseh ben Israel, who was advocating for the return of the Jews to England. and we spent quite a bit of time looking at the Jewish Enlightenment, the Haskalah, in Germany, the debate between Mendelssohn and then this guy, Christian Wilhelm von Dohm, who was also advocating for Jews to become part of German society, German culture. And then at the same time as that's happening in Germany, the French Revolution, the debate about making Jews citizens in France. Remember, we spent quite a bit of time going over the Napoleon and the Sanhedrin and his questions of which I included here, the questions that Napoleon asked of the Jewish population, and then we debated sort of how they responded and what their responses represent. Emancipation through intermarriage. We looked at those Jews who converted in Germany and why they might have converted. We talked about religious reform and the different key figures who led the different movements of religious reform, including Geiger, Frankl, and Samson Raphael Hirsch. And then our last section here has been on sort of the Haskalah in Eastern Europe and the experiences of Jews in the Russian Empire. One thing I want to mention just as a resource, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are things that you're like, wait, I don't remember talking about that. So just to go back to Blackboard, because I want you to be able to see what's on here. So the PowerPoint, this should be, I think I just uploaded the newest version of the PowerPoint. So if you go in here, it should have the PowerPoint that I'm using in class, and all the terms and topics and maps and everything that we've gone over. I think we're up to slide 120, maybe that's kind of where we are in terms of what we've covered so far. And then I wanted to point out to you, so your classmates have all contributed excellent in-class presentations, and those are available here under Student Presentations 2023. So if you want to remind yourself of who the Baal Shem Tov was, for example, here's Dijali's presentation on the Baal Shem Tov, or Shabtai Tzvi, right? Who was that? Or Manasseh ben Israel. Anyway, they're all in here in the Student Presentations section. So, any questions about that material or what to study, or things that you're I don't remember that? Are you really going to ask us about that? Yeah, Generally.
Is there going to be questions on the test that are mainly based on the sources online, not so much on the lectures?
I'm trying to think. What I would say, the section that would be based on sources online, and that's mainly either documents from the Jew in the Modern World or quotations that I included in the PowerPoint, that will be there's going to be a section where I will have a quotation that we analyzed in class, right? So for example, so this is not on there, we just did this, but be a man abroad and a Jew in your tent, right? Learn Russian, speak Russian, something to that effect, right? So that would be a quote, and I would expect you to be able to say oh yeah, that's Judah Leib Gordon advocating for Jews to embrace the Enlightenment and become Russian, right? So that's an example of something where it's a source that we've analyzed in the Jew in the Modern World. You're going to want to, and again, those are hopefully, most of the ones that we've analyzed in class, I have done you the favor of kind of screenshotting and putting into the PowerPoint, but you also know that the files are on Husky CT, the Jew in the Modern World. And we've basically gone through what's parts 1 and part 2 of those sources. So TJMW part 1 and TJMW part 2. Other questions? Yeah, Jelly.
Is a lot of the material on the test mainly based on in the modern world text, not so much the Gartner textbook?
The Jew in the Modern World, not Gardner.
Yeah.
Here's what I'll say for the like quotation section. It's almost all. I think it's all sources that are either in the Jew in the Modern World or that I have like quotes on the PowerPoint. The Gartner might be helpful if it, depending on like how good your notes are from class. So there might be sources that like I have on my list of key terms that I talked about in class. You're like, I don't have any notes on that. It's gonna be explained in Gartner, if that makes sense. And he's got a pretty good index too, so you can find stuff. Although actually we also have a digital file, so you should be able to search for that stuff in Gartner too. Other questions? For the chronology section, I'm not gonna, I think I might say on there like, I want you to put these events in order. There's 10 events. I'm not saying that you need to memorize the dates, right? But it'd be helpful if you have a basic sense that like the French Revolution was in 1789, which was after Shabtai Tzvi, was the false messiah in 1665, which was after the Spanish Inquisition, which was in 1492, right? Like you're going to have some general sense of when things happened. And I do that because this is a history class. And so, I think it's important to have a sense of like what happened before other things and also why it's important to know like what happened before and what happened after. So you don't necessarily need to memorize dates, but it's going to be helpful to know roughly when different things happened. Generally.
How long should the writing portion be?
You mean the essay?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go into that. I'm going to share my screen here. It's in the journal section, and I'm going to make this visible after class. Hopefully, you'll be able to see it. And I think you should be able to then. I've set it up so you can each post your separate responses, just like upload as attachments. So the question deals specifically with, so here's the question. Explain how the Jewish encounter with European culture and society led to unique innovations in Jewish religious practice that changed the nature of Jewish identity. Which of the innovations that we have examined, Reform, Positive Historical, Modern Orthodoxy, or Hasidism, do you find best suited to preserve Judaism and encounter with modernity? I'm asking you to kind of explain the differences between those movements, and then give me your opinion, like make an argument which one is best suited to preserve Judaism and the encounter with modernity. And again, for that second part, there is no right or wrong answer for the second part. You could make an argument that only like Hasidism and strict adherence to Jewish law and encouraging, requiring Jews to get as close as they can to God is the only way to preserve Judaism in the modern period. Or you could make an argument that you have to embrace progress and you have to embrace change, and the only way to save Judaism is to do that, right? So you could argue one or the other. What is important for this is that I want you to base your answers, and you will not get full credit if you do not cite specific sources that we've used in class. So you can use Gartner, you can use the PowerPoint, you can use class discussions, but you also have to use like specific sources that we have analyzed from the Jew in the Modern World. And those are things like the debates between Geiger and Frankel and Zacharias Frankel's argument, like on historical change and how he argues, like what should constitute change, and Samson Raphael Hirsch, and on religion allied to progress. And then there's also readings. We didn't talk about them much, but there are readings on Hasidism. If you want to base your argument on Hasidism, there's plenty of material in the course readings on Hasidism as well. And the question is designed, and I say this because I know it's like a default, right? People are like, okay, I'm going to put this into ChatGPT and it will tell me, right? I just want you to know that it's pretty easy to tell when ChatGPT like spits out garbage because it just skims out whatever it can find online. It's not going to be able to answer this question with reference to the specific sources that we have used in this class, right? Because that's not online. So you have to be able to answer this, with your own thinking and also with specific reference to the sources we've used in class. It's not long, right? So 2 pages, right? Clear argument, state your argument and base it with sources, 2 to 3 pages. I don't want more than that. I don't want to read that much. So make a clear argument, make reference to specific sources, and then turn it in before class on Wednesday, October 11th. Good. Any questions? So as soon as we're done with class, I'm going to make this visible so you can see it, and then you can upload your answers there. I think it'll be best to do this as a Microsoft Word file or some file that you upload to the journal function, if you can do that. Jennelise.
For the citations, do we have to include like quoted citations, like the quote and then like
Yeah, really good question. Yes, I think you should, include quotes, and then you don't have to do the full, like if it's coming from the Jew in the modern world, I know exactly where it is. So you could just put like TJMW page and then the page number that it comes from. Because it's just for me, it's not for a broader audience that will not know what the sources are. But yes, please use specific direct quotations, specific citations from the document. Any other questions? Dejalie.
Roughly how many, I know like we're supposed to use them to like defend our argument, but just how many would you expect for the regular amount of sources and like citations that we have, or like references and quotes?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like you said, enough to support your argument, but so for example, right, like if you're going to go through and make an argument for like why reform is good, but conservative Orthodox and Hasidism are not, I think it would be good to have like a specific citation for each of those movements to argue for and against it, right? To show that you have done your research and looked at each of them, if that makes sense, right? So just think of like, you want to make sure you have one for at least each of those movements. Yeah, Alex.
Sorry, I don't know if you said this, I might have totally missed it, but do you want the citations in MLA, APA?
Yeah, I'm not strict one way or the other. Whatever, like if it's in your major and you're more comfortable doing one way or another, that's fine, just as long as you have the citation in there.
Awesome, thanks.
It could be footnoted, it could be endnoted, it could be in text, right, with parentheses. I'm not going to grade one way or another on how you do it, but it's more important that you actually have it and I can see it.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, so you have a few days to, that's what I'm giving it to you now. We're not meeting, I'll send a reminder that we are not meeting on Monday. But feel free if people want to study together. If you show up in the classroom, there's other people in there and you want to study together, by all means, you can do that. And then we will meet in person on Wednesday. And let me just say this, if anybody has sort of accommodations. I should have already gotten something about that, and your test will be made available in a way that you can take it at the testing center with your accommodations. Let me just say that. So, but I should have already gotten something from CSD to that effect. But if not, you do have a little bit of time before Wednesday if you need to set that up. All right. Have a great weekend. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you on Wednesday. Feel free to be in touch if you have questions. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.